we're going to roll forward. All right, so the specific aims and the specific aims page. Different analogies out there. Some saying this is kind of the trailer that makes you decide if you're going to go watch the movie or not. I would actually say it's almost more important than that. Because I think that, the trailer might be good, the trailer might be bad, but then you go to the movie and you decide for yourself. I think that really the specific aims is the first step for a lot of people into the grant. And if you can write your aims and your aims page well, it frames the whole grant for people. And it gives them some context to understand. Because while we think that the people who are reading these grants, have an in-depth understanding, most generally they are not as expert as you in the particular content. So here's a story I want you to think about. So we have, sort of the three reviewers. The first, is a woman. She's the biostatistician, right? And, most grants are going to be reviewed by a biostatistician, epidemiologist type. Someone who's a little bit more of the numbers and study design and so forth. Now she's, this I just picked she because I don't want to say all he. I realize when I said the story in the past, I've said all boys, and that just isn't right. And I actually am so enamored with the fact that we have so many women. Yeah. But anyway, sorry. I'm glad you're here too, but it's good for you. It's good,
I have a PhD wife. I understand.
So, you have that person who, knows almost diddly squat about your clinical question, concern, or problem, right? So they don't know all these terms. I mean, that's just a very different training. So you have that person. You also, have reading your grant, somebody who is absolutely smack dab in your content area. Somebody who's about to kind of hit that high echelon peak.
We just turned the light off on the issue.
That was weird.
Yeah.
You guys were so enthralled at what
We
I was
were.
saying.
So passionate. We didn't move. We didn't blink.
If we have to, we'll do the wave. Keep going. And then, so then you have that person who's really, knows a ton about what you know, and maybe even is kind of looking at you like, here's this little comeuppance, they think they know, but I know, because I've been struggling in this area for a long time. And, who knows, maybe you did the fatal error of not citing that person, because that really, will piss them off. And then, you have this, you have this other reviewer who is, sort of, there because this is like the godfather of the general topic area. They may not know specifically what you're interested in, but this person has multiple, like PCORI and RO1. They're flying first class. They've ordered a glass of wine, and they're going to read your grant. So my point is, you have very different perspectives and very different styles of people or how are approaching, your grant. So your specific aims pages really can make or break you, because if they can kind of quickly wrap their head around the key concepts of, your content area and the key concepts of what you want to do, then the whole grant is easier to read. And it is the one page that everyone scrutinizes. Right? The statistician, maybe isn't reading about all the introduction. They might really be a little bit more concentrated on your methods section than they are on some of the other stuff, because they want to see what you're doing. But everybody will read this page. So it's really important. I think I said all this. It's the most important part of the grant. If you actually watch reviewers, typically it's the first section they read, and then they go back at the end and they read it again. As they're getting ready to give you your do or die score, and every reviewer is going to read this one. The specific aims page, in terms of grant writing, like I said, it's important, but it also could be a really good communication tool, because it's not just, you're writing for this, RFA, but then you're going to go over here and ask for money, or you've found out there's a new collaborator at the Pittsburgh Zoo, and, they want to know a little bit more about what you did. So often it's that kind of Cliff Notes that you will use with a new collaborator to sort of say, here's what we're doing, or here's what we've done. So it's prior to submission with your collaborators, right? Because, maybe you decide that you want to pull in a physician in, hospice care as well, and they need to kind of quickly be brought up to speed. It's post-submission when you're developing with sort of new programs, new people. And then just to review the NIH review criteria, And I bring this up because if you know these criteria, you also can kind of see when we talk about the content of the specific aims page, they're all there. So they're going to review what you write on the significance, the innovation, the approach, the investigator, and the environment. So the other thing, and I know it sounds crazy, but like I feel like as physicians you learn everything backwards. Physician researchers I should say, because you're like I want to do this, and you're writing stuff, and then someone teaches you the nuts and bolts. And I remember they're like, you have to use declarative like verbs in your specific aims. And so a specific aim should have an action in it. You're going to measure, you're going to calculate, you're going to quantify, demonstrate, categorize, identify, compare, determine, develop. We could come up with some more. I think measure is up there. So anyway, you get it. Always you want your specific aims. The page in general, but really your aims. You want in like bare bones, like the simplest language possible. Because again, like I said, it's the first step for a lot of people. And as much as we think we're all like really brilliant, in the end, we live in a society where we're looking for it to be made simple for us, right? Like we're all kind of rushing. And if you can get that first branch, then you can put the leaves on that branch, and people will understand and believe what you want to do. So these are the criteria that you'll see out there in terms, like we use the finer criteria for research questions. They talk about the PICO criteria for a specific aim. So a specific aim, ideally, now, all projects are different people. So, sometimes it may not work, but what population are you looking at? What is the intervention or exposure of interest? Who or how are you comparing this? And what outcome are you actually measuring? That should be included in your specific aim. So when you write them, you want to always kind of say, did I include those 4 things? And maybe you didn't. Like, so for instance, sometimes there's really not a comparison because you're just sort of starting and you're just measuring. But you at least want to know why. So the population, you want to say, who will contribute the data, and who will give you the measurements, and meaning like self-report, that kind of stuff. And then the population is, really no matter what, right? We're all going to have a subset of the population that we want to measure, and so those decisions are obviously a feasibility versus accuracy. You know what I mean? All right. So, sorry, I should have warned you guys. I was going to pick on you a little less so because we're short of time. But so, who's the population here?
Parents.
Right, parents. Any concern about that as a population in a specific aim? I mean, just that we're not really saying what parents, right?
There are lots of parents.
We want
that tremendously.
We want to, to get a truth in research, right? We always want to get at the whole world, the truth of the world, but we are always reducing it down to a subset. So as much as possible, you want to upfront let them know, where's this population? So, it'd be a population recruited from a federally qualified health center in an urban setting in Delaware. That would be pretty clear what parents you're talking about.
In sort of the, thousand mile view, we developed our research question, but can you give me just a snapshot of kind of what portion of that would we want to be in our specific aim? Like, how do they relate? Like, what's the overall?
I mean, I would say that if you have, the research question that you've come up with, there's probably 20 proposals and steps, to answer that research question. Do you know what I mean?
Have you guys seen a specific aims document before?
No. That's
Okay.
kind of what
I can pull one up right now.
Yeah, and
Do you have an example?
I didn't pull up a
I was just going to give them a
yeah,
sense of what
yeah.
they typically look like.
Yeah.
Because that will help you wrap your head around how it all fits
Yeah.
together a little bit.
Yeah. I'm seeing how it fits.
Yeah, it's a little hard until you've seen
but
it.
I'm like, I feel like I'd be writing the same thing again that I just wrote for my research question. Like,
Yeah, no,
more specific, more general, more.
The research question is the
It's the
broadest.
same.
It's like sort of, the big umbrella. The specific aims is the translation into, in order to answer that question, what steps are we taking in this proposal?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, my research question might be something along the lines of how do we better utilize physician recommendation to get people to do any type of cancer screening. And then I might propose a study where I'm going to look at the, qualities of the physician interaction as it leads to mammography completion in a population in Claymont, Delaware, or in a primary care population. So, something like that. So you could see that, as you take that step down, you've left a lot up here in the research question, which is fine. That's your next project. That's your different population. You know what I mean? But this is kind of the big question. But the specific aims, it's almost like, you're starting to begin the recipe, right?
I'm kind of wondering if my research question was more actually what would be a specific aim stage, because drill down like this.
Yes. I would say that, having looked at it.
Great.
And literally looking at it for about 2 minutes.
The specific aims page is usually packed. It's like chock full.
Wow.
So you only get one page to say everything that you want your whole encompassing thing to look at. This is like a little, it was a resubmit, so, so it starts off with, talking about as the prevalence of obesity has increased, public health experts have begun to focus on environments that shape healthy eating, right? So there's a little bit of the background, right? So you're giving somebody a context. But then, 3 sentences in, but it's not clear what effect greater access to healthy and unhealthy products has on diet, and several studies have found this, and others have found that, right? So I'm feeding into why my question's relevant. The greater presence of supermarkets, so then a little more specifics. And then the aims of the proposed study are 2. And then number 1, this is a funded study, to evaluate in a cluster randomized controlled trial design the effects of in-store healthy food marketing strategies on the sales and purchase of specific healthier items in 6 product categories. And then we actually did put milk, frozen entrees, beverage coolers, salty snacks, and cheese, specified right there.
Okay.
And then number 2, to evaluate the association of those changes in supermarket environments with changes in sales and purchase of specific healthier items in the same 6 product categories. And then the last one was to examine the relationships between the neighborhood characteristics and changes in sales and purchases of healthier items. So then after that goes into the hypothesis, and then how we would do it. So then the paragraph, 32 supermarkets in Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions will be randomly assigned to a treatment and control, intervention stores, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, you always have to say why your novel or particularly rigorous, novelty is always a big one. So you actually always say that it's novel. And then why. So you have to get that one last sentence in there. But it's pretty scripted.
The whole thing it's like your whole big picture condensed. So you may be repeating these at other points in your grant, but this is it. All on one page.
Yeah, so when you're asking about the research question, it's basically this part of the aim of the study, kind of not really in a question form, really as a goal, but then it's wrapped around with all this other content. So.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, the aims are an aim. They're an action. They're I'm going to do this, as opposed to. So, and I have all everything that Allison has too is in this PowerPoint, because there is kind of this template that you're.
Yeah.
That again, I felt like nobody told me. Until I struggled and wrote a lot of bad specific aim pages. But anyway, so and then going back to the PICO, the C is for control or comparison. So here's where you want to mention anything that you're going to do. If it's a randomized control, that's done, but nobody's starting there. Usually you're talking about looking at subgroups, or you're looking at pre-post, or you're looking at compared to historical data. Sometimes your question really is just this is the one that doesn't always, play. Because if it's brand new, you're doing focus groups, you're not comparing. You're kind of exploring these domains for the first time and trying to observe and quantify, your baseline. The intervention or exposure, when you are doing hypothesis-driven research, then you're talking about the intervention or exposure that you are associating with your primary outcome. So essentially, whether if it's an interventional study and you want to reduce BMI, you're going to describe your intervention. You don't have to describe the whole thing in your AIM. There'll be another place to describe it, but you want to make sure that they understand what are you doing with the intervention group, who are you comparing them to. And then sometimes it's just an exposure, right? So you might not actually be doing anything, but you might just be asking the question of, I'm going to look at African Americans and Hispanics according to, coming into the clinic to see who, in the end takes up, LARC or uses LARC. So it's not that you've done an intervention, but there's a particular exposure or, trait that I guess you're looking at. When we're doing work that is more about generating hypothesis. So, and I put this in, I didn't have it last year because I think it is really hard because a lot of these are sort of first steps. So I would say that they're more about generating hypotheses, especially if you're doing a lot of study groups, focus groups, and more qualitative stuff. Chances are you're a little bit more in the hypothesis generating stage than you are in the hypothesis testing stage. It's really about the characteristics that you plan to observe. That you predict might be potentially important in the construct. So you don't really know what the behavioral, landscape is for LARC in your population, but you have some ideas, right, already. So you're really thinking about what groups do you want to make sure to include and not miss. All right, so then the outcome. In a way, for me, this was always the easiest. It was obviously what's the change that you want to see. What do you anticipate? How are you going to measure that change? And not so much necessarily for the specific AIM itself, but in general for the specific AIMS page in your grant, always know that your AIM will name a very specific outcome. How that does and does not link to impact is different, right? So what I'm getting at is this. A lot of times, I was just looking at a study the other day that somebody asked me to take a peek at, and it was looking at targeting 3 to 5-year-olds, and they clustered a whole bunch of people into one group, and then a whole bunch of schools into one group, and a whole bunch of into a non-intervention group. And the idea was, can we prevent cardiovascular disease by doing this intense diet, physical activity, so and so? Well, guess what? You can't measure cardiovascular disease in 5-year-olds, no matter how hard you try. You just can't do it. So what they measured, and it was a good study, what they measured was, change in self-reported activity. So that change in self-reported activity is what goes in your specific aims, not cardiovascular disease. But you have to be, fully acknowledging that in the end nobody gives a flying hoot about in and of itself about change in what people say about their behavior. It's then your job to really think about how does that or does that not link to the true impact that I want to have. All right. All right. Somehow. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. It's just that I have, like you do, I have her picture sort of blocking my talk.
Yeah.
That helps me, okay.
Enhancing it, really.
Right, exactly. I'll tell you.
It's like an ornament hanging on a tree.
I was at a remote from a computer, not at my desk and not at home. I was trying to download my presentation from last year to modify it and, put in, and it was the only way I could get it was from the website, and it was read-only. So then I'm, finally get it, down to work on it. And then I'm working on this computer that has, PowerPoint version 1. So, and I was, having to recreate it all, and it was just, so my visuals are not very exciting in this PowerPoint. I just want you to know. But, that's why I'm being really, dynamic and gesturing a lot. All right, so the specific aims page has an expected format. And I'm welcome to hear if people have come across sort of other ones or different ones. But again, this is something I was I was just trying to look at other people's and mock up. But the first thing that you want to talk about is sort of the gap in the current knowledge or the need, depending on, sort of where you're targeting. The more you get to the big federal, big money, you're going to need to show them that you really know the literature and the, national statistics, problems, that kind of stuff. More at the local level, this is about need. And then you want to put in there the objective of your research or program. So how is what you're going to do either going to fill in that knowledge gap or fill in that need, or, for a lot of you it's going to be a little bit of both. And then you want to put forth your central hypothesis. And this is just a little bit different than what you said. For whatever reason, I was taught the hypothesis and then the aims, but it could be either way. So, I think that if we educate people about smoking, they will stop smoking more, and it's especially important to come from your passion. You list the aims with those nice little PICO criteria. Then after you've listed those aims, you want to put talk about the outcomes in the aims and how those relate to real impact. Like I said, you put in the aims that you're going to measure some self-reported behavior, great, but you then need to say why that matters, why should anybody care, and then it's next steps.
So you don't have on there the actual, so I never knew there was a formula. This is the first, really, I mean, I deduced, right, over time that you read them, these all kind of seem alike, right? But,
right.
But there's nothing in there about the research design, which has always been a paragraph of mine.
Yeah, I think that, let's see. I would say you're right.
There's something about methods.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's sort of inherent to some extent in your aim, but usually they want to know, what your sample's going to be, and are you gonna get those people, those places?
I think you're right. I think you need
it's
a line there about your method. It's like it's missing one bullet or something.
Yeah.
I think I think you're right. I would add that bullet.
Back to the page.
All right. So under the objective of the research, this is kind of where your research question goes. Long-term goal of the research in this program. What will be possible because of the specific work that you've outlined. And here's when you want to kind of, comment on why you, your team, and your setting. And, I don't know, how you guys all, want to think about this, but I know for me a lot of the time I'm, sort of, making the argument that people should fund us, not specifically because we are not Harvard. We're Christiana Care, and this is where delivery of care is actually happening. You know what I mean? This is, an important step in translating from the ivory tower to actually taking care of people. You'll have different reasons for saying that, but whether or not it fits in here, but
also there's probably a canned version of that you can adapt from somewhere else, like your environment or setting, because saying that we're an institution of 600,000 people who serve this many people, you don't usually have to reinvent that. Usually there's some canned text about that you can get from someone else that can save you a lot of time.
Right. Well, and usually within the grant, within most, the higher the level, you have a section called environment, where or team, or, where they want you to really extrapolate on it. But on the specific aims page, you want to get one line in there about why you, your team, and your place. You know what I mean? And I think this is absolutely valid. If you've seen the research has been done at Harvard on all white people, you know what I mean? It is absolutely valid for someone to say, and we're gonna try that again, here, because that's not, do you know what I mean? That's not necessarily as generalizable as it should be. The gap is outlined in the introductory paragraph. It includes relevance to human health, a brief summary of the current knowledge, the gaps in current knowledge, and why should everyone care about that gap. So just be careful, especially in this kind of work. Sometimes you can identify a gap, but that's not enough. You have to tell people why is it important to know that. And these are some things too, just rules that you learn. Don't ever make aim 2 completely dependent on a successful one. So fatal flaw, I'm going to design and validate my survey. And then I'm going to take my survey out and, la-da-da. And you should give me, $200,000, and they're thinking no, because like at least half of that you're probably not going to need in case your survey doesn't work. So they should be logical but not dependent. You should be able to, if aim 1 falls completely to pot, move forward to aim 2. I'm sorry. So, and I said this stepwise logical progression, these are the do's. And if you can't kind of in your mind go from 1 to 2, ask yourself if maybe you've made too big of a leap. Or are you trying to include too many things in one proposal? Always limit to 3 or less. Nobody wants to read much more than that. You have to have a really good reason if you're going to have you want to connect in logic and words. I know we tend to I should own this. I tend to not want to be repetitive. It gets boring. But at the same time, if you have a term that works, use it, because that way they're not having to rethink. Is that the same thing as that? Do you know what I mean? Even if it does become repetitive, it's better because it's clear. Like a menu or a formula.
So for kind of some of the things we're doing, we kind of listed our aims. These are the different things we're going to ask in our survey and in our assessment. But I guess for more of the next step, it would be, and then we're doing this. That wasn't a question. But I guess I can look at some of the other people's specific aims to see kind of where that goes, I mean, I guess if we have a couple things we're looking at, for instance, in the survey, that could be aim 1, and aim 2 could be, kind of more of the research question, kind of leading into that. Therefore, based on this, we will look at X, Y, Z. Is that fair assessment of that?
Say it again?
Yeah, I'm not being clear, sorry. It's been a long week, but I guess, the aims would include, so for instance, we're doing the survey. So the first specific aim would be do the survey, look at X, Y, and Z. And then specific aim number 2 could be, based on this, we will evaluate whether somebody's self-perceived health relates to what they would choose. Because our aims were just basically, we're going to look at this in the survey, look at this in the survey, and look at this survey. But it sounds like, the aims would be better to kind of enrich it and also talk about kind of a little bit more of what you're going to evaluate rather than what you're just going to look at. And we can talk about it offline.
Yeah, let me think about that, because I'm not...
Yeah, I don't think it's clear either. I'll think about a better way to clarify that.
So even though I forgot the bullet point on the lead-in slide, in your specific aims, you do have to specify what do you want to do, how do you plan to do it, who's going to do it. The last paragraph is, I always think of it as kind of the salesman, saleswoman paragraph, and it's innovation. It's why, why this is going to, be a giant, leap for research and people in general and save the world. So you'll often see these terms. And I, rather than be too boilerplate, well, being a little boilerplate, I guess, but, emerging concepts, state of the art. This is the first attempt to, and you really want to think about, why is this different? So, do you understand a little bit? Sometimes for me, impact and innovation, for whatever reason, got a little mixed up, but it's different, right? Impact is, you're going to, get, 5,000 kids to exercise more and have less heart attacks. Innovation is what's different and why this method might, be completely new or really different than other methods that have been done before. All right. Again, in the last paragraph, you're going to make sure you cover impact, the outcome, the work, and you often use terms like you're going to complete understanding of an important problem. And I put that there because if nothing else, we can always say that, right? This will add to the understanding of this important problem. You're going to advance a problem metric. So here's where you might say, we're going to. Hopefully you've made your point that breast cancer screening is important, so here's where you say, this will eventually, this work will contribute to the reduction of breast cancer mortality in underserved populations.